Hi everyone, I'm Emily Momberger, and my classroom management book presentation is over Lost at School: Why Our Kids with Behavioral Challenges Are Falling Through the Cracks and How We Can Help Them by Dr. Ross W. Green. So Dr. Green graduated from Virginia Tech in 1989 and earned his doctorate degree from the University of Florida. And since then, he's worked as a clinical psychologist for over 30 years. He's the founder of the nonprofit organization Lives in the Balance, which provides free training and education to parents, educators, and healthcare professionals about his model of classroom management. I checked out their website and it has a plethora of good information on it as well. He is the author of 4 New York Times bestselling books that are all centered around the same approach or model to reducing challenging behaviors in children. Um, Here are the 4, and he's updated them as well with updated research that I found on his website, livesinthebalance.org. So I would recommend that. So this book was helpful for all educators, but I found it particularly useful for teachers who have found the reward and punishment system to be lacking in schools. The author, Dr. Green, presents a different model for reducing what he calls challenging behaviors in the classroom and at home that is centered on working with students to develop the critical cognitive skills that they may be, what he says, lagging or lacking. The book's first major point is that many educators are stuck viewing students through a narrow lens, often with a predisposed judgment. So, with this perspective, we make remarks like, he's so manipulative or she's just not motivated. Dr. Green argues that we must view students through a broader lens and consider what the student's behavior is communicating to us. And that's why I added this quote or this image. It encompasses Dr. Green's philosophy for the foundation of his entire model, which is that kids do well if they can, and doing well is preferable. So they want to do well, but they often don't have the skills to do so, and in turn communicate their emotions or their frustration through their behavior. So Dr. Green is the originator of the Collaborative and Proactive Solutions, or CPS model. This model is what all of his books are about, but Lost at School is really the foundation of it, the book I read. The CPS model is based on the idea that challenging behaviors occur when the demands and expectations placed on a kid exceed the kid's capacity to respond. Dr. Green explains that more often than not, students understand or know the expectation, and the behavior is the expression of difficulty meeting the expectation. So the difficulty is the trigger for the behavior, and that's referred to as an unsolved problem throughout this presentation and in the book. So the model's focus isn't on the actual behavior of the child, such as like yelling or swearing, punching, throwing things, but on the skills they're lacking to meet an expectation. And when kids don't have this skill, it's referred to as a skill deficit. Often these skills fall under the executive functioning or social emotional learning categories. So students may need support building flexibility, organizational skills, or self-regulation strategies. The model teaches them that the best way to reduce challenging behaviors is to solve the underlying problem. And problems are solved through, as the name suggests, collaboration between teachers, counselors, students, and parents on proactive solutions. And I'll share some examples of what that looks like later. So Dr. Green argues that rather than trying to modify student behavior with a system of rewards and punishments alone, we uncover the underlying problem and teach students the cognitive skills they need. So that means he's a fierce advocate for non-punitive, non-adversarial discipline. With the increase that we've seen in school or out of school suspensions and detention, he says that we're turning into a broken record, that if it's not working, then it's not working. And this is when it's time to try something new, which is his model. But he is a fan of restorative justice. And my last note is that in the book, Dr. Green refers to students as behaviorally challenged or challenging kids, and they're lacking skills. When recent updates, he acknowledges isn't the most ideal language, but doesn't offer any alternatives and continues to use it. So you might see that reference throughout the presentation. So Dr. Green has identified 3 options for addressing unsolved problems or challenging behaviors, Plan A, B, and C. Plan B is recommended and explained in the book, and the only one that I'll be presenting on today. So the main difference in Plan B is that unsolved problems are solved collaboratively between teachers, parents, counselors, and students by discussing individual unsolved problems and pairing each one with a solution. These solutions are meant to be durable and long-lasting as the students gaining a new skill that hopefully they'll be able to use for the rest of their life. Plan B starts with the adults meeting to complete an assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems, they'll all said. This is basically a discussion guide that Dr. Green created that adults use when they meet to identify specific skills the student lacks instead of focusing on the behaviors. And then there's 2 different types of approaches within Plan B. There's proactive, which is the process I just described, identifying the unsolved problems so we can proactively change the environment in the future to prevent triggers and then prevent behaviors. And then emergency is recognizing a student is escalating in the moment and trying to change the course of their behavior by shifting what you're saying or the environment. Dr. Green explains this should only be used when a solution hasn't been implemented yet, like when you have to pick only the top 3 unsolved problems to work on or skills to teach the student, but there's more skills, but you just haven't prioritized that yet. And then off on the right, you'll see the 3 steps that we're going to go through for Plan B. So the first step, when you identify that a student may be lacking a skill or has a challenging behavior, the first step you do is the empathy step. So in the last slide, I explained that all the adults would get together, the counselor, the teacher, the parent, and describe what the situation looks like when a behavior occurs, and then what that skill that student may be lacking. Once all the skills are identified, and then the teacher meets with the student to conduct the first step, which is empathy. And this involves gathering information from the child to achieve the clearest understanding of what's making it hard for the child to meet a given expectation. Throughout Dr. Green's work in the book, he really emphasized the language we use when talking with the student, and he specifically recommends using the phrase, "I've noticed that it's been difficult for you to research your country for the social studies project. What's up?" So the bolded part is obviously what he recommends. We want to use open-ended language so students don't feel like we're telling them what to do, but that we're there to listen. In week 2, we read from Garrett about the importance of building meaningful relationships and using them to inform instructional decisions like differentiation and to create a positive, inclusive learning environment. Dr. Green also encourages learning more about our students' interest rather than just the situation they may be in. For example, he warns against theorizing that a student isn't completing their math homework because of their parents' divorce, when the answer might be they don't actually have the skill to figure out what the problem is asking them. Lost at School lists 5 possible student responses and corresponding strategies in the book, and it's also on my infographic, so you can get more information there about tips and tricks to talk to students whenever they seem like they don't want to communicate with you in the moment. So the second step is define adult concerns. So now we have what the child is concerned about, and now the goal of the second step is adults enter their concerns into consideration about the same unsolved problem that the student addressed. When speaking with the student, the best language to use is collaborative, such as "the thing is, you won't always have a group partner to help you research the project," or "my concern is." Lost at School emphasizes this importance of not dismissing the student's concerns that were previously established. So don't use phrases that say, "well, I understand, but," or give the student an exhaustive list of things they need to fix or skills to learn. This entire process of Plan B is just focused on one unsolved problem or one skill deficit, not the list of skills that they may have. And then that emphasis is why I chose this quote, because if the student's concerns are addressed, then it's not Plan B anymore. It's just the adult telling the student what to do. And then lastly, adult concerns usually fall within one of 2 categories: how the unsolved problem affects the student or other people. And that's how you phrase your concern. As you can see in the examples above, the teacher's worried about not having the skill of researching affecting the student's ability to do a specific part of the project. And then the last step is called the invitation step, with the goal is to brainstorm potential solutions to address the previously discussed concerns. So adults are inviting the student to think of solutions. Invitation step. Dr. Green explains that adults and kids work collaboratively towards a realistic and mutually satisfactory solution. Mutually satisfactory, meaning that both the student and adult's concerns are addressed, and the plan must be realistic, because the goal of Plan B is for solutions that are durable or long-lasting. So it's important to try to let the student take the lead when you meet with them to go through the invitation step, such as, I wonder if there's a way you could get your help with your project and practice researching on your own. Do you have any ideas? Often the adult may already have an idea or plan, but by giving the first try at generating a solution to the student, you're instilling a sense of ownership or buy-in. You're showing them that you really care what they think. Throughout this course, we dove into Garrett's 5 key areas for classroom management, and 4 of which are preventative measures. And this aligns with Dr. Green's philosophy that by identifying a student's skill deficit and creating solutions with them, we can proactively prevent future challenging behaviors. And then also, as teachers, when we react to behaviors instead of being proactive, we tend to use discipline or punishment instead of discovering the reason or need behind the behavior, which is kind of like just putting a Band-Aid on a rock that's like breaking apart, which you see here. So I mentioned the ALSUP guide earlier, which helps adults identify which skills the student has difficulty with. And of note, like some students may have 10 or 20 skills identified after you complete the guide, and that's okay. It's just a tool to get all the adults on the same page. The team will prioritize which skills to work on first so that the plan is manageable for both the students and us, and we don't get overwhelmed. We should prioritize skills that cause behaviors that are unsafe or occur the most often, which is why this quote says, one of the main case study throughout the book that we followed the kid the whole way through, he is just given suspension like 5 times in 1 year until the counselor comes in with this new plan and addresses the root of the problem. So, as I mentioned earlier, their CPS model does contain a Plan A and C. Plan A is when the adult tells the child what to do without any discussion. Unfortunately, it is like the most popular right now, but it's actually counterproductive to changing behaviors. And then Plan C is when the team temporarily sets aside a specific problem to prioritize others, usually that affect safety. And then Dr. Green explains that a diagnosis offers a great deal of information, but not that much useful information, such as a diagnosis doesn't tell us what skills a student lacks because each student's behavior should be considered independently. Children with a specific disorder may have difficulties with certain skills, but we shouldn't make assumptions because then we're viewing them through the diagnosis lens. And then lastly, Dr. Green cautions against skipping steps because when we're in a rush, when we have a lot to do, adults will usually skip the empathy step. And then if you skip the empathy step, you're just telling the kid what to do and you're actually doing Plan A, if that makes sense. And then if you can't see this picture, it says Billy's been in timeout 43 times. Like, why isn't it working? Or it must be working really well. So just obvious of what not to do. And then lastly, a classroom application. So what I hope you take away from Lost at School is that behavior is communication, and behind every challenging behavior is an unsolved problem or a lacking skill or both. In this course, we've learned about several potential causes and responses to challenging behavior, both in and out of school causes. And I thought it was interesting how Lost at School emphasized not assuming or theorizing why a student misbehaved, but rather finding a solution with the student. Similarly, in our book, Discipline with Dignity, the authors state that teachers must ensure a student's misbehavior is not a lack of effort, but that the student is missing a needed skill. So regardless of which approach to challenging behaviors you use in your classroom, the consistent theme has always been to dig deeper, or that behaviors are not often just surface level. And then Plan B is a relationship building process. And building relationships is another theme we've seen throughout this course and our entire time at Roberts. One of Garrett's key areas for preventative measures of classroom management is building caring, supportive, trusting relationships, just as Dr. DeGreen discusses in his book. Discipline with Dignity teaches us how to use a variety of ways to communicate with students, such as caring gestures and nonverbal messages. And then lastly, many of the case studies in Lost at School followed kids having difficulty in one of the two areas, executive functioning and self-regulation or social emotional learning in general. So we first learned about students requiring explicit instruction and self-regulation when we covered functional behavioral assessments, and that all students deserve social emotional learning embedded into the daily curriculum. And I noticed that several of Kaufman's core strategies to support students' executive functioning were similar to the plans developed in this book, Lost at School. So, for example, ensure kids learn the skills necessary to be a good group partner, like active listening and taking turns talking before they're paired up as partners. So, overall, I would definitely recommend this book. It contained many of the same major themes throughout the course, but presented an approach that I felt was more unique or unique enough to be helpful still. So, there are my references, and thank you.